Hello, World Studies scholars. If you would like some support in how you can classify and organize this reading into economic, political, and social causes for the Haitian Revolution, feel free to follow along with me as I model how we do this. So, as we read each paragraph, we will take some time to highlight what we believe to be economic causes for the Haitian Revolution in green, what we believe to be political causes for the revolution in yellow, and what we believe to be social causes of the Haitian Revolution in blue. So paragraph 1 is really an overall short description of what the Haitian Revolution was. And it says the Haitian Revolution included a series of conflicts happening at the same time between 1791 and 1804. It was the largest and most successful revolt by enslaved Black people in history, and they had succeeded in ending not just slavery, but French control over the colony of Saint-Domingue. This led to the creation of Haiti, the second independent nation in the Western Hemisphere after the United States. Now, this is really an overview. We'll dig into these different parts throughout the reading. But here, I do see a political statement where the people in Haiti succeeded in ending not just slavery, but French control over the colony of Saint-Domingue. I think that's a political cause. It's not really a cause, but it helps us understand some of the political experiences from the revolution. All right, paragraph 2 through 4 talks all about social hierarchy. So I would say we're going to see a decent amount of blue in this section. In 1789, there were 5 distinct sets of interest groups in the colony. There were 32,000 white planters who owned the plantations and enslaved Africans, and Petit Blancs, who were artisans, shopkeepers, and teachers. Some also owned a few enslaved people. Many of the white planters and Petit Blancs on Saint-Domingue began to support an independence movement that began when France placed high tariffs or taxes on the items imported into the colony. I'm going to pause there because I see both a social cause here. This is telling us that the people in power were white planters and Petit Blancs. That is a social cause that shows who had power and why that might create dissent or disagreement with people who are not in these two categories, white planters or Petit Blancs. And then it talks about that the white planters and Petit Blancs of the island wanted to become independent from France because France was putting high taxes on the island. Taxes tells me that that's an economic reason. So it even is telling us that the highest in power and the richest people on this island were even upset with France, who had power and control at the time of the island of Haiti, because they were not being given the right to kind of decide who they traded with and the amount of money that they earned off of their trade. All right, let's keep reading this paragraph. Furthermore, the white population of Saint-Domingue did not have any representation in the French government. That sounds to me like a political cause. If they have no say in government, and government is a political portion of society, I could see some dissent there. White planters sought greater economic autonomy from France, while Petit Blancs argued for the equality of white people, not just for landed white planters. Despite their calls for independence, both the white planters and Petit Blancs remained committed to the institution of slavery. So we see here, this is a lot of information in this first paragraph, but we see that the highest class in Haiti, the Petit Blancs and the white planters, all of these individuals would identify as white. So this is still within the highest powered people who identify as white. They even have reason to want to have a revolution against France, but their reasons or motives were a little bit different. So we know white planters, their main reason for revolt was an economic reason. They wanted their own economy. While the Petit Blancs, who are a little bit lower class, but still are able to work and make money in society, and some even have enslaved people, they are fighting for more rights for land and equality for all white people. This is a social cause. And then something to consider, though, is neither of these two groups of people really have any desire to see non-white people have independence. So that creates kind of an added layer in this revolution. All right, so paragraph 3 tells us about the lower parts of the social system in Haiti. There were 3 groups of African descent: those who were free, those who were enslaved, and those who had run away. There were about 24,000 free black people in 1789. Half of them were mixed, and often they were wealthier than the Petit Blancs, which made the Petit Blancs resent them. The free blacks and mixed people were known as affranchis. The affranchis were sometimes slave owners themselves and aspired to the economic and social levels of the white planters. Beginning in the 1760s, white colonists began to restrict the rights of affranchis. Some of these restrictions did not allow the affranchis to hold public office, practice privileged trades such as law or medicine, assemble in public after 9 p.m., sit with or dress like whites, gamble, travel, or enter France. These offenses were punishable with fines, imprisonment, chain gang duty, loss of freedom, and amputation. Again, a lot going on in this paragraph. We see the breakdown or the explanation in this first section, talking about the different groups of African descent and the classifications of how they were grouped. That, I would say, is a social cause, is creating difference amongst various people of African descent. It talks about how many free black people were in the colony of Saint-Domingue, which is modern-day Haiti, at the time in 1789. And it talks about some of the resentment between the Petit Blancs and those free Africans. So we'll make that a social cause. And they talk about the idea that the affranchis, those that are of mixed or African descent that are free, they are fighting for economic rights as well. They want to be able to dictate how they run the colony. And then we see some political situations break down. In 1760s, in order to try to kind of enforce a difference between the white colonists and the affranchis, they created restrictions that would not allow affranchis to hold various rights in society. All right, paragraph 4. The enslaved population was close to 500,000. And the vast majority of people who were enslaved worked in the fields. Others were household servants, boilermen, and even slave drivers. Enslaved people endured long, back-breaking workdays and often died from injuries, infections, and tropical diseases. Malnutrition and starvation also were common. Some enslaved managed to escape into the mountainous interior, where they became known as Maroons and fought guerrilla battles against colonial militia. Despite the harshness and cruelty of Saint-Domingue slavery, they were enslaved African rebellions before 1791. Haiti had a history of enslaved African rebellions. The enslaved Africans were never willing to submit to their status, and with their strength in numbers, colonial officials and planters did all that was possible to control them. So a lot of social reasons for the Maroons and the enslaved Africans to revolt in the Haitian Revolution. I think this last few sentences does a great job of explaining a social reason for revolt. If you were an enslaved African or a Maroon in the island of Haiti, or Saint-Domingue at the time, you are going to want to revolt against the norm or the way of life at the time. When we talk about some of the work that the 500,000 enslaved people were forced to do, that really is an economic cause. If you are working for no pay and cultivating the crops in these fields to make money and not getting any sort of compensation or money for it, that's going to be a big reason why people are going to revolt as well. All right. Moving into the next section about land ownership. Paragraph 5 is focusing on land ownership. It says, land ownership in Saint-Domingue was a critical issue before, during, and after the Haitian Revolution. Land ownership granted access to power and prosperity and was sought after by all of the colony's social classes. So who has the rights to land would be, I would classify that as a political cause. Trying to gain access to land is, in my mind, a political reason for revolt. And that goes with rights in society. Highlight that yellow. During the buildup to the revolution, white colonists were increasingly threatened by the Afranchis, who were becoming powerful landowners. At the beginning of the revolution, one of the enslaved people's central demands was to have small plots of land and an additional free day during the week to cultivate them. Later on, during Louverture's reign, laborers objected to his adherence to a plantation-based economy which required blacks to work land that was not theirs. That is furthermore an economic reason, also arguably a political reason for revolt. Through the course of the revolution and in the years following, former enslaved people felt owning land was critical in order to truly claim their freedom. To that end, they fought for the colonists and even their own leaders for land rights, never giving up their goal to own the fields they worked in. This can really be considered both a political and an economic cause, because they're fighting for their rights and to make sure that laws give power and control and equality to people to own land. But they're also fighting for a way to make money, to be a part of the economy that was running at the time in Saint-Domingue. So you really could highlight this as green or yellow. Part 2 of the article is the beginning of the Haitian Revolution. The French Revolution of 1789 was a significant event for the oncoming rebellion in Haiti. The ideals of liberty, equality, and fraternity resonated with white planters, petits francs, Afranchis, and enslaved populations, and resulted in a number of Haitian-born revolutionary movements that began at the same time. Also inspired by the French Revolution, many enslaved people increasingly engaged in marronage, running away from plantations to the mountainous interior. Here, I would highlight the ideals of liberty, equality, and fraternity as a political cause, could also be a social cause for revolution, as it is some of the rights and ideals that are written into many constitutions in societies. I would also highlight that enslaved people, and I'm going to highlight it in blue because I'm going to talk about a social cause, running away, that would be a social movement or a new way of being. I don't necessarily think it's a law, but it would be running away as a social plan or a social cause for revolt. All right, paragraph 7. In 1790, France made laws which gave Saint-Domingue some autonomy at the local level. That's political. Go ahead and highlight that in yellow. The white planter class said the autonomy only applied to them and excluded petits blancs from government. Another political thing. That obviously is going to frustrate petits blancs, or those that don't own land. That's going to be frustrating to them. However, these laws left open the issue of rights for Afranchis, and white planters refused to recognize them as equals, creating a more tense situation. In October 1790, Afranchis led their first armed revolt against white colonial authorities. Now, this is somewhat political, but it's also a social movement. They didn't actually write into any laws that Afranchis did or did not have rights, but they definitely believed it or said it out loud, which is going to create tension between the two groups. All right, paragraph 8. By 1791, enslaved people and Afranchis were fighting separately for their own agendas, and white colonists were too preoccupied with maintaining their dominance to notice the growing unrest. Throughout 1791, such revolts grew in numbers and frequency, with enslaved people torching the most prosperous plantations and killing fellow enslaved people who refused to join their revolt. That is going to be a major social cause. Once people are starting to die during this, that's going to really raise awareness. Paragraph 9. In May 1791, the French Revolutionary Government granted citizenship to the wealthier Afranchis, but Haiti's white population disregarded the law. That sounds political in nature to me, so I'm going to go ahead and highlight that yellow. Within 2 months, isolated fighting broke out between white colonists and Afranchis, and in August, thousands of enslaved people rose in rebellion. So you see here, I'm not going to highlight anything here, but we're getting now into the actual revolution. White colonists are fighting because they want to have most power and control. Afranchis, remember that's freed Africans and people of mixed descent. They are also going to be fighting because they believe they deserve more rights in society. And then by August of 1791, the enslaved people are going to also rise up. So 3 different groups, all kind of fighting for 3 different things. Paragraph 10. August 14th, 1791 is considered to be when the Haitian Revolution officially began, with the Bois Commune ceremony, a voodoo ritual presided over by Boukman, a Maroon leader and voodoo priest from Jamaica. This meeting was the result of months of strategizing and planning by enslaved people in the northern area of the colony who were recognized as leaders of their respective plantations. So, this is definitely a social movement, taking time to combine or come together as a group of people who are unhappy with the way life is going. They come together, they have a voodoo ceremony. Remember, that is a religious practice in Haiti. And they officially said it is time to revolt. Paragraph 11. Due to the fighting, the French government took away the decree granting limited rights to Afranchis in September 1791. So they think we no longer can let any communities of color have these rights because now everyone is rebelling and revolting. This only spurred on their rebellion, so the Afranchis get very angry at this. That same month, enslaved people burned one of the colony's most important cities, Le Cap, to the ground. The following month, Port-au-Prince was burned to the ground in fighting between white colonists and Afranchis. So these are more events. Truly, I would put this as social because these are more ways that people are coming together to show their unhappiness through revolution. Now, we're into the meat of the revolution, the 10 years of fighting that take place from 1792 to 1802, starting with paragraph 12. The Haitian Revolution was chaotic. At one point, there were 7 different parties fighting simultaneously. Enslaved people, Afranchis, Petit Blanc, white planters invading Spanish, English troops battling for control of the colony, and the French military. This is social. These are the different social groups or groups of people that are involved in this revolution. Alliances were struck and quickly dissolved. For example, in 1792, Black people and Afranchis became allies with the British fighting against the French. And in 1793, they allied with the Spanish. Furthermore, the French often tried to get enslaved people to join their forces by offering them freedom to help put down the rebellion. In September 1793, a number of reforms took place in France, including the abolition of colonial enslavement. That section there is political. This makes a political shift in the revolution. While colonists began negotiating with enslaved people for increased rights, the rebels, led by Toussaint Louverture, remember he was an Afranchis individual, understood that without land ownership, they could not stop fighting. So while some people were considering ending this revolution when France started to create reforms to end slavery, Toussaint Louverture and his following said they need the right to own land. You could really put this under social or political, but this is kind of what rights they're fighting for. All right, paragraph 13. Throughout 1794, the 3 European forces took control of different parts of the island. Louverture aligned with different colonial powers at different moments. In 1795, Britain and Spain signed a peace treaty and ceded Saint-Domingue to the French. That's an actual political move that happened. Let's highlight that in yellow. All right. By 1796, Louverture had established dominance in the colony through his hold on power was weak. In 1799, a civil war broke out between Louverture and the Afranchis. In 1800, Louverture invaded Santo Domingo, the eastern half of the island that was colonized by Spain, which is now modern-day Dominican Republic, to bring it under his control. Truly, I would just put a star next to paragraph 13. This is a lot of different changes that are happening between European forces and the people of Saint Domingue, or modern day Haiti. So this is just some of the brunt of what's happening during this revolution. Paragraph 14. Between 1800 and 1802, Louverture tried to rebuild the destroyed economy of Saint Domingue. He reopened commercial relations with the US and Britain, restored destroyed sugar and coffee estates to operating condition, and halted the wide-scale killing of white colonists. Let's highlight this as green. This is an economic response to the revolution. He even discussed importing new enslaved people to jumpstart the plantation economy. We're also going to put that in green. In addition, he outlawed the very popular voodoo religion and established Catholicism as the colony's main religion, which angered many black people. This is a political move because he's actually putting laws into place about this. He established a constitution in 1801 that asserted the colony's autonomy with respect to France and became a de facto dictator, naming himself Governor General for life. He put the black people back to work on the plantations under military rule and encouraged many of the French business owners to return. So Louverture, after the fighting ends in 1800, really brings back into order the way things had been prior to the revolution for at least enslaved Africans. This is going to be very frustrating for enslaved Africans. Now, the last sentence, I would say, is more economic, the idea of making money off of plantations. But this sentence here is political, kind of how he, political and social. But he puts in a constitution, that's a political move. And he says that he has the power and control for life. Obviously, this is not going to be something that others will agree with. So paragraph 15 tells us that in December 1801, Napoleon Bonaparte, wishing to maintain control of the island, attempted to restore the old regime and French rule by sending his brother-in-law, General Charles Leclerc, with an experienced force from Saint Domingue that included several other exiled Affranchise officers. Many white planters supported Bonaparte's invasion. Furthermore, Louverture faced opposition from black people who felt he was continuing to exploit them and was not instituting land reform. Toussaint struggled for several months against Leclerc's forces before agreeing to an armistice, or an end to fighting, in May 1802. However, the French broke the agreement and imprisoned him in France, and he died on April 17, 1803. So there are some social shifts that happen here. Socially, a lot of people do not agree with the way Louverture wants to run this new colony of Haiti, and therefore we see more fighting happening and more opposition from many populations of people on this island. Last section of the reading is all about the final years of the revolution, starting with paragraph 16. Believing that France's intention was to restore the system of enslavement in the colony, black people in the Affranchise, led by two of Louverture's former generals, Jean-Jacques Dessalines and Henri Christophe, restarted the rebellion against the French in 1802. So another social movement, groups of people banding together to fight against the French because they want an end to enslavement. During this time, many French soldiers died from yellow fever, contributing to the victories by Dessalines and Christophe. Dessalines led the revolutionaries at the Battle of Viters on November 18, 1803, where the French forces were defeated. Paragraph 17. On January 1st, 1804, Dessalines published the Declaration of Independence and abolished the colony of Saint Domingue. This is a political move. The original indigenous Taino name of the island, Haiti, was restored. France became the first nation to recognize its independence in 1825 in exchange for 100 million francs, with a repayment period until 1887. So France finally says, we agree and we recognize that Haiti is an independent country from us. We don't have control or colonial power any longer, but they only do so with an economic agreement from Haiti saying you will pay us 100 million francs with a repayment period up until 1887. So while this is a political thing where France, this is a big move, France officially says we honor and recognize that Haiti is its own nation. They do so with an economic negotiation. Last sentence. Haiti thus emerged as the first Black republic in the world and the second nation in the Western Hemisphere after the United States to win its independence from a European power. This is truly social, economic, political. I'm going to put it under social because it's a big deal. This is a momentous time in history after many, many years of fighting and dissent. Now, this is our article, and we are going to spend time next week classifying our economic, political, and social information into a Google Slides activity while also putting together information about the different groups of people that were involved in this revolution. If you viewed this video as a way to check your own work and you had some things highlighted slightly different than I did, that is okay. This is somewhat based off of your perspective of what you're reading and learning. But if you needed a little support, hopefully this also benefited you in your ability to engage with the economic, political, and social causes of the Haitian Revolution.